saw this today from a Globe and Mail journalist. I was shocked, but not surprised. Christy Kirkup says, report details alarming levels of stress for mental health of Canadian journalists and media workers. Survey from November 1 and December 18th, 2021 revealed health impacts resulting from the events of the last 4 years. 69% report anxiety, 46% report depression, 15% PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder. That reporter linked to a press release. This one here. Press release says, alarming levels of stress, harming mental health of Canadian journalists and media workers. I'll get to the press release in a moment, and we'll look at the underlying study too. But I think we already have enough information, don't we? You know what? It's been a tough couple of years for everyone, largely because of the media. If it weren't for the media shrieking about the virus and deaths and trauma and risk and danger, and getting it all wrong, by the way, with no context, with no proportion, with no scientific knowledge, just absolutely engaging in fear porn for kicks, for clicks, to feel important, to feel they had an exciting story, to feel relevant, and to indulge their instinct of control and government authoritarianism. If you hadn't watched a single news story or read a single newspaper in the past 2 years, I promise you that unless you worked in a long-term care home, you literally would not have known that there was a pandemic afoot. You would not have known it were it not for the news media. The average age of those who died from the virus was around 80. The average victim of the virus who died was severely ill to begin with, and I mean severely ill, and very overweight on average. So if you were a normal-ish person, average age, average health, average life, you literally would not have ever known there was a pandemic afoot. I blame the media. So of course I blame them, and I blame the media not just for acting as propagandists and fearmongers, but for actually pressuring politicians to go harder. So yeah, we're all stressed. We're all a bit anxious and depressed, to a large part because of journalists. So no, I don't really have a lot of sympathy, especially for people who consider sitting in an office and writing their thoughts on a website to be a job. And I mean, I suppose it's a job, but it's not really work, is it? And I say that as someone who does that for a living. It's about as close to a hobby, a recreation, a playtime as you can get and still get paid. I mean, you know who has had a rough 2 years? Drivers, truck drivers, restaurant delivery drivers. Everyone else was at home, from the Zoom class, the lawyer class, the accountant class, the government class, the lockdown class. These guys and gals driving around endlessly, truck drivers, delivery drivers, especially in the early days when we didn't know how risky things were, for not much more than minimum wage, by the way, in their cars, in the traffic, no matter the weather. Any working person, really, any real people, any people who kept the rest of us in the style to which we become accustomed. Truck drivers, farmers. Now, not a lot of sympathy for bloggers and propaganda of some sort. And say, do you think there's a teeny tiny chance that journalists have, I don't know, just a touch of drama about them? I mean, if you ask a coal miner or a factory worker or a construction worker or a fisherman or a delivery driver how their day goes, you might hear about how tired they are or whatever. But if you ask a writer, someone who writes for a living, how their day was, you might get just a touch of hyperbole, just a little bit of self-pity, just a little bit of look at me, solipsism, as they call it, just a small chance of that, right? Journalists are always the heroes of their own story, and these days in woke circles, the biggest heroes are the ones who are the biggest victims. Of course they're going to say they're victims. Imagine saying that you have PTSD from being a journalist. You know who really has PTSD? Firemen, like those who ran into the towers on 9/11, soldiers, veterans who saw cruelty, maybe even did cruelty, I don't know. They saw violence. Cops. Those people have real PTSD. Journalists. It's a sick and twisted kind of stolen valor, don't you think? I tried to find some reliable stats on PTSD. Here's the U.S. Veterans Department on their official stats. It also seems to depend on which war they were in, which sort of makes sense. I'll read it to you. The number of veterans with PTSD varies by service era. Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, about 11 to 20 out of every 100 veterans, or between 11 and 20% who served, have PTSD in a given year. Gulf War, Desert Storm, about 12 out of every 100 Gulf War veterans, or 12%, have PTSD in a given year. Vietnam War, about 15 out of 100 Vietnam veterans, or 15%, were currently diagnosed with PTSD at the time of the most recent study in the late 1980s. The National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Study, it is estimated that about 30 out of every 100, or 30% of Vietnam veterans, have had PTSD in their lifetimes. So 15% at any given time. I believe it. So 12% in the quickest war, 15% in the longest war. Here's some stats for firefighters and first responders that I found. It's from a suicide information site in Canada. They say 22% of first responders develop PTSD. That's a Canadian stat. I've seen the number at 20% for American first responders. I believe it. You have some pretty rough things going on. People dying in a fire, and if it's your job to save them from the fire, but you are unable to save them, I can see how you would internalize that. Maybe even think that you're to blame for the fire if you couldn't save everybody. 22%, sure, I believe that. The people who deal with life and death every day and willingly run into a fire while everyone else runs out, sure, yeah, 22%. But the same as some of our soldiers, right? Soldiers and firemen and medics. And to that pantheon of selfless people, we now must add journalists. 15% of journalists claim to have PTSD. Yeah, so a higher rate than some of those coming back from the Gulf War, eh? On par with our Vietnam veterans, eh? Drama. Oh, yeah. Just ask them. I'll read some more. Here's the press release that these tweets were based on. Workers in Canada's news industry, watchdogs of our democracy, are suffering disturbingly high levels of work-related stress and injury, according to a new report released today on Parliament Hill. Oh, is that who the watchdogs of our democracy are? So not the soldiers or the police, not the courts or the opposition, but those losers? 99% of whom take cash from Trudeau. If they're the guardians of democracy, we're in trouble. They're the watchdogs, more like the lapdogs. They take payoffs from Trudeau. They're not the watchdogs. Where was their bark these past 2 years, other than barking at us, the powerless, in the service of the powerful? Like I say, drama. That was an excerpt from my daily TV-style show called The Ezra Levant Show. Each weekday, I do a monologue on the news of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest. I read some fan mail or hate mail, depends on which I like more. And we end with a video of the day. You can get it all at rebelnewsplus.com.